Good evening, everybody. The Music Fan is back, bringing smiles to the faces, knowledge to the people, and most importantly, music to the masses. And I am back with the second part of digging through discographies with Mumford and Sons. Now, last time we talked about their debut album, Sigh No More, a really strong album with a lot of great and anthemic singles, but in terms of the depth, it sometimes left a little bit to be desired. Now we are back to talk about the second album, Babel. So here we go. Now, a little bit of background before we get to the actual album. So on December 7th, 2010, in collaboration with, I'm going to mess this up so I'm looking really close to it, the Daror Project and Laura Marling, they released an EP album recorded in Delhi, India. The album was recorded in a makeshift studio with traditional Rajasthani musicians and features 4 collaborations, including multicultural mashups of Marling's Devil's Spoke and Mumford Sons' To Darkness. In late 2010, Mumford Sons had already begun road testing new material that they had been working on. Most of these songs, including Broken Crown and Below My Feet, had already been played live on numerous occasions before the album's release. On April 2011, the group joined Old Crow Medicine Show and Edward Sharpe and the Magnetic Zeros on the inaugural Railroad Revival Tour, which was inspired by the Festival Express tour across Canada in 1970 that included Buddy Guy, Janis Joplin, the Grateful Dead, and the band. Traveling exclusively in vintage rail cars, the 3 bands performed in 6 unique outdoor locations over the course of a week, starring in Oakland, California. Now, this also spanned a documentary directed by Emmett Malloy called Big Easy Express. It premiered in March 2012 at South by Southwest Film Conference and Festival in Austin, Texas, and won the Headliner Audience Award. It also won the Best Long-Form Video at the 2013 Grammy Awards. They recorded 2 songs for Andrea Arnold's adaptation of Wuthering Heights. One of them, Until Enemy, was used during the closing credits. Also, in June 2012, they contributed the song Learn Me Right with Birdie for the Pixar film Brave. So that's what they did, other than using the time to tour with Sigh No More and all that work. I personally think it's really, really cool about the Railroad Revival Tour. I would have loved to have seen it if it was happening at the time. And if it is still happening, I would love to track that out because that sounds like a really, really cool thing. Kind of like a bunch of hobos riding on rail cars just playing music. I feel like that's a really cool way of seeing the world. But this album was again produced by Marcus Draves, who is the person who worked with them on Sigh No More. It was announced via their official website on Monday, June 16, 2012, that the album would be released in the UK on September 24th and the following day in the US. So they did not change any of their sound on Babel, but they took the time in order to perfect the sound that they used on the previous album. Now this album had 5 singles. I Will Wait, which dropped in August 7th, 2012, Love with the Light in November 5th, 2012, Whispers in the Dark on March 11th, 2013, Babel on July 9th, 2013, and Hopeless Wanderer on August 4th, 2013. Now, we've already said that this album was produced by the same person and didn't have any much difference in sound comparatively to Sigh No More. And going through this album again, I can definitely see that it is more polished than the previous album. And I think that is hugely to their advantage. On the first part, you got a lot of great songs with a lot of energy on here, starting with Babel. Really, really fun opener, starting with a acoustic guitar and then going into the full band. And there's even still that play of loud versus soft, especially in the bridge part where it's just acoustic guitar. Now, it does feel a little bit like Winter Winds because it does have that 6/8 feel, but I think that this particular song feels a little bit more power to it and a little bit more complexity in the arrangement. And then that falls into Whispers in the Dark. And what I really, really like about this album in comparison to the previous one is there is a little bit more of a interlude idea. So the ending of one song will sometimes go into the beginning of the next song. Babel to Whispers in the Dark is that idea. Also, Lover the Light and Lover's Eyes also work together that way as well. I think that's a really, really cool idea. No, it's interesting that both of them end on the D chord and go right into it. I think that's kind of interesting. I would say if that is one drawback, it could have been a little bit different in terms of what song was the ender and the beginner, you know, where that bridge was. And you got songs like I Will Wait, which is also very bombastic. Holland Road, very, very full of energy as well. Lover the Light, a lot of energy, though in a much different way. This is probably one of the songs that feels a little bit different comparison to everything else that they have done before. It has a different beat and finally has a different idea than what I've heard from the previous album. Hopeless Wanderer also builds very well and has a lot of great energy. Below My Feet, also full of so much anthemic energy. There's a lot of also great building and tension and growing and swelling on a lot of songs. Whispers in the Dark starts very, very quiet, and it is just mostly acoustic guitar. There has a little bit of electric guitar in there, but it's very understated. You don't really hear much of the electric guitar on there. But it keeps building and building to an awesome chorus at the end, and another highlight on this album. Holland Road is another one that builds very well and brings in a lot more as it goes on. The banjo is very interesting and stands out comparatively. I would say the song that encapsulates the best in terms of building is Ghosts That We Knew. It's my favorite song on the album. Kind of like I Gave You All, it is the best building song. I don't think it builds as well as I Gave You All, but it still does so much, and it's beautiful. For the most part, you got this acoustic guitar for most of it, and it's plucked. Just a lot of beautiful parts in there, and it keeps building and building, and eventually brings in the banjo, and then eventually brings in the whole entire band. The bridge is just beautiful. It's the Hold Me Still. That part is wonderful, and it gets into that last part before it drops down again. It has an interesting chord progression. I love playing this song. I love playing a lot of these songs. Lover's Eyes is another one that builds very well, and comparatively to some of the songs on the previous album, you get this idea of two different tempos happening. So you get the more understated part in the first half where it is mostly guitar, and then afterwards you get the whole band in with the banjo and the kick drum and everything, and it changes into this 6/8 feel and keeps building and growing in such interesting ways. Hopeless Wanderer kind of also does that as well, where it has this contrast in the tempos and feels. But this time around, the 6/8 feel starts at the beginning, and then you have this more straightforward 4/4 idea afterwards. The piano intro is really, really cool. Also, something that happens on this album that is different from the last one is you have a song like Lover the Light, which has more rubato ideas, and then you get the actual verse idea. But then once you get to the ending, it starts building not just dynamically, but also in tempo. It starts speeding up, which is a nice little touch that makes it a little bit different. Now, what I also like about this album is that for the most part, the spacing out of ideas works a lot better. Yeah, you have Babel and Holland Road in the same vicinity, but it's enough difference in the middle of those two where it doesn't feel like it is another 6/8 song and another 6/8 song, you know? And then, for the most part, I will say the only time that it feels a little bit kind of like, why are these two songs next to each other, is Whispers in the Dark and I Will Wait. At least at the end of Whispers in the Dark, it feels very similar to I Will Wait. And to me, I Will Wait is one of their weaker singles. It's very anthemic. It's very catchy. But for me, it isn't as interesting as all the other singles on this album. I don't think it does enough for me to be able to be like, yeah, this is really cool. But still a catchy song. I find myself singing it every now and again. I think it spaces out very well throughout this album, where you have a lot of bombastic ideas, but then it's interspersed with a lot of slower stuff, a lot of more subtle, softer. Like the fact that you have those four bombastic, and then you get Ghosts That We Knew, and then it goes into Lover of the Light, which is a little bit more rubato and all over the place in timing. Then Lover's Eyes, which is that contrasting idea, and then you get the Reminder, which is the shortest song on the album, but it's also very sweet, very much like Tim Shell, where it's mostly just acoustic guitar. It's a nice little break after everything. Then you get the Hopeless Wanderer, and then I will say, if I do have any drawbacks on this album, the last three aren't the most interesting. Broken Crown, I like it enough. It kind of reminds me of Thistles and Weeds and all the other darker songs on the previous album, but it doesn't hold a candle to those particular ones. It does enough, though. It feels kind of like a darky blues-ish song with folk tinges, and it again, it builds very well. But Below My Feet and Not with Haste kind of don't really bring much to the table to me comparatively to everything else. It's not like they're bad songs. A lot of this CD is fantastic, and if you have those two as some of the weaker songs, then I think it's enough. I think it does enough that you don't have to worry about these last two. I wish it just wasn't at the end, because it's your lasting memories. Below My Feet is another one that builds very well. It has mostly acoustic ideas, and interesting to me is Below My Feet, Not With Haste, and Reminder, I believe, and some of these other ones have these kind of elongated verse ideas where it adds another, like, one or two measures each time and adds a little bit more to the verse. And I think that's interesting that Below My Feet and Not With Haste would have both of those together. You know, I wish they'd kind of spruce it out a little bit. But Below My Feet, very anthemic. Not With Haste, a very more uplifting song, and it is a nice way of ending it. It just isn't my favorite song. Harmonies on here, fantastic throughout the album. There's so many good harmonies on Whispers in the Dark, I Will Wait, Ghosts That We Knew on that bridge. Lover of the Light has some great stuff too. Lover's Eyes, the choruses are fantastic. Hopeless Wanderer has some awesome harmonies on here. I feel like they worked so much better on this album than the previous album. You don't get as much of the stereotypical banjo on here, nor do you get as much of the same rhythmic ideas. You do get them sometimes because, unfortunately, you can't get past that. But, like, I would say, Not With Haste, Below My Feet, Broken Crown, Hopeless Wanderer, like, a lot of these songs have a different feel, and all of them kind of have enough to bridge it away from each other, where they're all their own songs rather than kind of carbon copies of the others, kind of like what happened with the first album. I think with that extra time, they were able to polish out a lot of really cool things, and with working with the same person, it makes it that much easier. It's kind of like if you go back to my first digging through discographies I talked about with Linkin Park. Hybrid Theory is a groundbreaking album. Meteor was just a little bit more polished because they had more time with each other. Same thing with this one. I would say lyrically, it talks a lot about love and relationships and being a part of them and breaking up and learning from them and, you know, stereotypical ideas. For the most part, there's a lot of imagery, a lot of good imagery again. I'll say maybe the previous album did a little bit better, but there's a lot of biblical imagery, a lot of Christian imagery, religious imagery, and I think it does well enough to add more depth to these songs. It doesn't do the same ideas of referencing certain books or certain plays or anything like that, but there's enough imagery in there to make it interesting. To me, this is a fantastic album. I wish that the ending was a little bit better, but going through this whole entire album, even like Reminder, which I would put the weakest only because it's the shortest song, but I still love that song. I would say going from Babel up to Hopeless Wanderer and even Broken Crown, I enjoy all of them. I love singing them. Lover of the Light, I Will Wait is the only one in the first 10 songs that I kind of skip sometimes, but that's basically it. I've listened to this album constant times. I believe I had it in my top 5 of that year, and it's for a good reason. It's full of a lot of good depth, and maybe the singles are a little bit stronger on the first album, but I think cohesively this is a much more in-depth and deeper album than the previous one. When it's all said and done, My rankings of this, of course, are going to be number 2, Sigh No More, number 1, Babel. I just think there's a little bit more work put into it, and because of that, it shines a little bit brighter than the previous album. Now, in terms of sales, Babel debuted number 1 in the UK, selling 159,000 copies, becoming the fastest selling album of 2012. It also sold 573,000 copies in the UK altogether in 2012. The album debuted at number 1 on the US Billboard 200, selling 600,000 copies, the second biggest debut of the year behind Taylor Swift's album Red. The album spent a total of 15 weeks at number 1 on the Billboard Alternative Albums chart, longer than any other album since Nickelback's Dark Horse. Thank God. It sold 1,463,000 copies in the US in 2012, which made it the 4th best-selling album in the US in 2012. It was also the 11th best-selling album in 2013, with 1,096,000 copies sold for that year. As of May 2015, the album sold 2.7 million copies in the US, making it 2 times platinum, at least with those numbers. The album also debuted at number 1 on the Canadian Albums chart, selling 75,000 copies. Rolling Stone ranked the Babel number 11 in their list of 50 best albums in 2012. The album was nominated for Grammy Awards, winning Album of the Year at the 55th Annual Grammy Awards. The album was also nominated for a Brit Award for British Album of the Year in 2013 Brit Awards. Babel won the Juno Award for International Album of the Year, and it's also included in Q Magazine's list of the 50 greatest albums of 2012. No matter how you slice this, this was a fantastic album, and it got the acclaim that it needed to. I'm usually not always on the side of the Grammys, but I believe that Babel deserved that Grammy Award for that year. It was a phenomenal CD. If you haven't listened to it yet, you have to. If you love Mumford Sons and never listened to this whole entire album all the way through, you need to. It's chock full of so many good songs and a lot of depth. And yeah, maybe you can skip the last 2 songs, but to me, it's the most cohesive album. But we still have 2 more to talk about. And next week, or potentially later this week, we'll see what happens, we'll be talking about a completely different change in sound when I talk about part 3, which is Wilder Mind. Now, in order for you to watch that, you need to do a couple of things. First off, if you love this album, give this video a like. Let me know what you love or hate about this album. Share this with your friends if you think that they would be interested in this. Keep watching my videos, and the most important thing would be to subscribe to this channel. If you haven't already and love what I do, what are you waiting for? Just give it a click. It means the world to me. Also, while you do that, click on the bell as well so you can be notified when this next part will be dropping. But before then, I will have a couple of other Are You Ins. So, until then, this is the Music Fan signing off.